Hi, sixth grade. Time for another video. We are starting a new chapter. We are moving on to chapter 10 and we're going to be talking about equations. So today we're going to talk about expressions, and we're going to first look at how we would write expressions. So let's start by looking at this word problem. So this word problem says 5 hikers were hiking on the nature trail. As they proceeded up the path, 2 other hikers caught up with them and joined their group. Okay, so this is a word problem, and we want to write an expression that shows the equation that we're going to do in this word problem. So this is how we would do it. We would take the information that we have, and first we know that we have 5 hikers. And then we keep reading, and it says that they were hiking on the nature trail, and as they proceeded up the path, 2 other hikers caught up with them and joined the group. So in order to write an expression to show that, we would put a +2. So 5 hikers were hiking, 2 other hikers caught up with them and joined the group, +2. So what we did on that last slide is what you would call an expression. An expression is a mathematical phrase made up of numbers, operation signs, and sometimes variables. So I want you to pause for just a minute, and I pause the video for just a minute. I want you to write this definition down, please. Okay, good job. Okay, so the expression that we wrote for this word problem of 5 plus 2 is what we would call a numerical expression. Okay, so we're using numbers to show the equation that we want to solve. So this word problem says, after the 7 hikers had walked 1 mile, the path became very steep. So 3 hikers left the group and went back to the trailhead. So we're going to write another numerical expression to show this equation. So why don't you go ahead and pause the video and you write the numerical expression that would go with this word problem. Great job. Okay, so you should have had your 7 hikers that were walking for a mile, and then the path becomes steep, so 3 hikers leave the group, and so you should have had a -3. So 7 minus 3 is the numerical expression that you should have written for this word problem. Okay, let's take a look at a different type of word problem, and one where we're going to have to use a different type of expression. So this one says, Glenn saw a large group of hikers walking together on the nature trail. When the trail became narrow, the guide divided the hikers into 2 groups. Okay, when you first read that, you probably feel like there's some missing information, that you can't write an expression based on the information that you've been given in this word problem. So that takes us to our next mathematical term that I'm going to want you to write down in your journal. A variable is a letter used to represent an unknown value. So a value that we don't know, they haven't given us a value for something, we would use a letter to represent that. And those are found in an algebraic expression. So now we're going to take a look at that word problem that we were just looking at, where we felt we did not have enough information to solve it. We're going to solve it using a variable. So let's go back to this. So Glenn saw a large group of hikers walking together on the nature trail. When the trail became narrow, the guide divided the hikers into 2 groups. So we know the information that we do have is we know that this group of hikers was divided into 2 groups. But what we don't know is the number of hikers. So instead of putting a number, because we don't have the number for the number of hikers, we're going to use a variable because our number of hikers is unknown. So for the number of hikers, we're going to use the variable h. H is going to represent the number of hikers. And we know that these number of hikers have been divided into 2 groups. So we're going to put a division sign, and then we're going to put a 2. So our algebraic expression for this word problem would be h, which represents the number of hikers, divided by 2. The other way that you could write this is you could write it as h over 2. When you see that, you know that you're going to be dividing h by 2. Okay, now we're going to leave that there, and we're going to, in a couple minutes, we're going to talk about how we actually find what that h is, what the value of that h is. But for now, I'm going to show you one other algebraic expression. So let's take a look at another one. The trail guide led 3 times more hikers on the afternoon hike than he led on the morning hike. So again, we do not know our number of hikers, but we do know that in the afternoon, the guide led 3 times more of the hikers than he did in the morning. So we would put the 3 first times h. Okay, h is our variable that is still representing hikers. So we know that in the afternoon, we are going to multiply 3 times the number of hikers, and that's how many, and then we would find out how many hikers he had on his guide that he guided in the afternoon. Now there's a couple other ways that we can write this algebraic expression. We can write it 3 times h. We can also do 3 with a dot and then h, and that little dot represents a multiplication sign. And then the other way you can do this, and this is what you see a lot in algebraic equations, is where you simply put the 3 right next to the variable. Okay, and when you see it like that, when you see it written like that, you know you're going to multiply 3 times whatever h is worth, whatever the value of h is. So here's another math term that I want you to write down. This math term is called a coefficient. And that's a big long word, and it simply means the number that comes before the variable in a multiplication expression. So it's this. It's what I just showed you. When you have a number that comes right before the variable and you know you're going to, that means to multiply, that 12 is the coefficient. Okay, it's the number that comes before the variable. Okay, let's take a look at some more examples of expressions. So these expressions are written out, and we are going to put them in numerical, we're going to write them as numerical expressions. So the first one says the quotient of 12 and 4. So if I asked you to write a numerical equation for the quotient of 12 and 4, you would write 12 divided by 4. Or, like I said, you could also write it 12 over 4. Remember, quotient is always division. Okay, that should be your clue to know what type of operation you're going to be doing. Quotient is always division. What about 2 to the 3rd power minus 3? How would we write that as a numerical expression? Why don't you take a minute and see if you can write that one down? Okay, hopefully you wrote 2 to the power of 3, you wrote an exponent, minus 3. Okay, that's what it should look like. What about this next one? 16 less than 30. That should be an easy one. Subtraction. You should have 30 minus 16. And then the last one, the sum of a number and 5. Okay, now this is going to be an algebraic expression because all we have is one piece of information. We're missing, it says the sum of a number. We don't know what number they're talking about. So we need to choose a variable to represent that number. So in this case, we're going to choose n, okay, the sum of a number and 5. So sum is always going to be addition. So in this case, we would put n plus 5, or, okay, because of our properties, we know, and like what we call flip-flop math, we can either do n plus 5 or we can do 5 plus n. Either way, we will end up with the same answer. Okay, here are 4 more that I would like for you to pause the video, and I want you to write the expressions for each one of these equations. Great job. Okay, so 6 times a number. So in this one, you're going to have another variable. So you can write it 6 and an x right next to it. Okay, that would be fine. You could do 6 with a dot and then an x, or you could do 6 multiplication sign and then an x. Now you didn't have to use an x. You could have picked any letter as your variable for this one. But your expression's been set up in one of these 3 ways. Okay, how about the next one? The product of 8 and 7. What is product? Product is always multiplication. So hopefully you have an expression that looks like this, 8 times 7, okay? The next one, a number divided by 6. So again, we need to pick a variable. In this case, I picked n, so I have n divided by 6, or I have n over 6. Either one of those, however you chose to write it, is fine. And then a number decreased by 4. A number decreased by 4. Decreased, that should be your clue that you're going to be subtracting. We need to pick a variable. In this case, I picked a. Okay, a minus 4. Okay, now we're going to talk about expressions that have more than one operation. And for these, you're going to have to remember PEMDAS, or order of operations. You're going to need to go through those. Remember, parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. Okay, that's PEMDAS, that's order of operations. And so for these expressions that we're going to look like, you're going to use PEMDAS to decide which operations you're going to do first in the expression. So let's start again with a word problem. Mrs. Donner delivered a container of cookies to the church for a youth activity. Elisa brought 3 dozen more cookies. How many cookies did Mrs. Donner and Elisa bring to church? Okay, so Mrs. Donner delivered a container of cookies. Well, we don't know how many cookies, so we're going to need to use a variable to represent cookies. So in this case, we're going to use the letter C. Now we know that she brought this container of cookies, and after she brought that container of cookies, Elisa brought 3 dozen more cookies. So we're going to add to Mrs. Donner's cookies 3 dozen more cookies that Elisa brought. And so that would be 3 times 12, okay? Because a dozen equals 12, and she brought 3 dozen. So if we're talking about order of operations, or PEMDAS, we know that we are going to do the multiplication first. So we'll put that in a parentheses to help us out. So in this case, okay, this is how we would write the expression for this word problem. C plus 3 times 12 in parentheses. Okay, that would be the expression that we would write for this. Okay, so you're probably wondering, so how do we solve when we have an algebraic expression that has a variable, how do we solve it? Well, I want you to go ahead and write this down. Expressions can be evaluated, or solved is another word for evaluated, by substituting a value for the variable. In other words, the way that we solve an expression with a variable is we give that variable a value. We use a number in place of that variable. So let's do a few practice problems with that. So here we have our expression that we just wrote using that word problem about the cookies. And so we have, remember, C plus 3 times 12, that's all in parentheses. So for C, we're going to plug in the value of 27. We're going to say that Mrs., oh no, I can't remember her name, but the lady that brought the cookies, that she brought 27 cookies. That's how many cookies were in her container. And so we're going to add to that 27, okay, 3 times 12. So first we would do our operation that's inside the parentheses. So we're going to multiply 3 times 12, and that would give us 36. Then we'd add 27 to that, and we would get a total of 63. Okay, so that would be the answer to our word problem about the cookies. So we simply substituted a number for our variable. We used 27 for C. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at a couple more. So let's write an expression for this one. The sum of 8 and a number divided by 2. So this is going to have a couple of operations in this expression. So first we have the sum of 8 plus a number, okay, because sum is always going to equal addition. So the sum of 8 and a number divided by 2. Now I have 2 examples here of expressions, and we need to determine which one is the right one. Which one do we have correct when we're talking about order of operations? So which one of these expressions would be correct? Well, let's take a look at our problem again. It says the sum of 8 and a number divided by 2. So the first thing they want us to do is to add up 8 plus a number. And so we would then choose the first one. The second one would be incorrect because the second one we would be dividing the number by 2 first, and that's not what they're asking us to do. So in this case, this first expression is the correct one. Okay, that is the end of our video. Here's your assignment for tonight. Besides your notes, you're going to do practice problems on page 214. You're going to do 1, 5, and 11. And all the practice problems and the video notes are due tomorrow. I know that was a lot of information that we went through. We're going to really be putting it into practice tomorrow during class. So as long as you just have a general understanding of what a variable is and what an expression is, okay, you'll do great tomorrow as we work through it. Hope you guys have a great night. We'll see you in the morning.